All right, welcome back. We're going to continue now with more news. Perhaps it's been said in a class of their own, as seen in the 2024 matric results with an 87.3% pass mark. And yet today, we're going to be exploring their prospects for the future, given massive budget constraints facing South Africa's education system, a growing population, and of course, the increase in enrollment numbers. It's all compounded by a leadership and governance crisis at some of the institutions as well. So we're going to be chatting all things higher education and training as enrollment for the new academic year continues and perhaps kicks off. Prof. Luke Sinwell, Sociology Professor at UJ, is going to be weighing in for more. Prof. Luke Sinwell, good morning, and thank you for making time to be with us here on the SABC at this hour.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's look at some of the dynamics unfolding, perhaps starting off with the enrollment numbers, the impact of declining funds that's already exacerbated. There's already been exacerbated by constrained resources. Perhaps you could give us your opinion from your vantage point, how this has obviously also been impacted by the population growth and migration that has led to an increase in numbers for enrollment.
Well, what we've seen over the last few weeks is that, the demand for the spaces for higher education cannot reach or meet up to the demand. So, we've had 300,000 students achieving a matric pass rate to study at the university, but we can only take in about 200,000. So at UJ, for example, we have had 360,000 applicants and only space for around 10,000 people, which means you get a 3% chance, according to those statistics, of actually getting in. And then a lot of people are provisionally accepted, which means that they meet the qualification to be accepted, but we don't have space for them. And so this has created some kind of a tension between the university and the first year students who want to enroll. But then we also have another problem, as you mentioned, which that there's been funding cuts of around 5 billion rand that was announced in February 2024. So what is happening is that we are being stretched thin within the university. Soon it's going to be the case that more of the money to higher education will be going to NSFAS, if that's not already the case, than to the operational costs of the university. So what that means is that we get more and more people coming to the university, more and more demand, but not as much resources to deal with it. So the pressure ends up being put on students and on academic staff to deliver the degrees. So for example, at Rhodes, 20 years ago, you had 50% of the budget coming from the government, or 80% of the money that the university needed coming from the government, whereas now in 2024, last year, it was about 50%. So what is going to happen, or what is already happening, and what perhaps we're missing is that there is an ongoing shift around the politics of education, which then connects to the perceived need to diversify income streams and often rely on private donors who then are able to shape the public education process. So what it means is that there'll be choices that need to be made. For example, that some courses will be viewed as not financially sustainable. I think the humanities and the social sciences will be hit hard. And then there'll also be a focus on pass rates, which we have, where the numbers of pass rates, the people who pass, become more important than the education that is actually being undertaken at the universities.
Luke, thank you for those opening remarks. Speaking about the politics of education, then I just want to then look at whether there's a leadership crisis or vacuum at universities and institutions across the country, given what is happening on the ground. Do they stand in the way of effective governance? Is education captured by the bureaucracy of it all? Talk to us a little bit more about that from your vantage point.
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily having to do with specific individual leaders at the universities. I think we have competent people, but the problem is the approach to higher education increasingly becomes centered around managerialism and corporatization and branding, so that the university becomes like a business. So you have performance management for staff, and you have the university responsible for building brands and responsible for the perception. The administrators are responsible for the perception of what the university does, rather than thinking about contributing to teaching and learning and providing resources for teaching and learning. And there's also a growing separation between administrators and lecturers in departments who have PhDs and people who are teaching, whereby there is less democracy. So the people who are actually teaching have less power to control what happens at the university, and they also have less resources, because those resources are going to research and branding rather than teaching and learning. And
so, Prof, Luke, let me come in there, because in the interest of time, I want to then look at how the politics or the ideology of what and how is being taught comes to the fore. I'm asking this because I also want to then look at the way in which it affects how the university connects to the public at large, given their mandate.
Yeah, so the other thing that we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years is a growing distance between what is done, what is taught, and the research that is done at the university and the actual public. So there's a separation as well between what is increasingly viewed as the ivory tower, where researchers can do the kind of work that they want, untouched by politics, untouched by grassroots movements, but we're not contributing to public knowledge or to building grassroots movements to fight for social change. And similarly, that's related to this process because students as well, instead of being viewed as citizens and people who can contribute, build the knowledge that is necessary to contribute to social justice, are viewed as consumers. So they're just there to consume knowledge, and they are viewed as our customers. And then if you view students as your customers, then it's not far off before you start saying the customer is always right. And then you undermine the education process as well.
And so, Luke, as we wrap up, how do we then course correct? What are the other conversations that we should be having? What's been left out? How does this dynamic affect the youth as well?
Well, we need to use this moment, especially given what is happening in Gaza. We can see that education is a highly politicized practice. You have people being annihilated in the name of human rights. You have scholasticide. In the US, politics is on the tips of everyone's tongue when you talk about higher education, because Donald Trump is passing executive laws whereby you're not allowed to teach the history of the country. You're not allowed to talk about slavery or apartheid because white people might feel guilty in class. So what we can see from all this is that we have to look at education as inherently political, and also we should be using this moment to develop a renewed vision of education where we think about what it can do to create a more just society.
Yeah. All right. So, Prof. Luke, obviously transformation is also key. And I know that this is another factor that has to be factored in. But I'm going to leave the conversation there. Thank you for being part of this conversation starter. We're just trying to spotlight this morning on higher education and training, perhaps as enrollment for the new academic year continues. Again, thank you to Prof. Luke Sinwell, Sociology Professor at UJ, for weighing in.